this startled me awake. The phone alarm was ringing. I turned off the alarm. I sat on the edge of the bed, pondering the things I had seen in my dream. The face of the man who leaned in to tell me that Alper wasn't out of town had been erased from my memory. It was like a nightmare, yet a doubt lingered within me. I called Alper. He said he was on the way and would be home in a couple of hours. I got ready and left for work. I felt a great fatigue weighing on me. My head was pounding as if it would split open. The whole day was like poison to me. When I got home, Alper was there. While having dinner, perhaps influenced by the dream, I asked detailed questions about Alper's business trip out of town. Since there was nothing in Alper's answers to make me uneasy, I thought I was overreacting and scolded myself, closing the subject. It was evening, so we went to the bedroom to sleep. This time in my dream, my spouse Alper and I were on vacation at a ski resort. We were skiing, eating, and having a great time. It felt so real. We were rolling in the snow, throwing snowballs at each other. Alper suggested we have some drinks. We went to the hotel bar together. After having our drinks, we went back to our room because it was late. Since it had been such a fun day, I found myself happily singing and admiring myself in the mirror. Alper was watching me from behind, laughing, hugging, and kissing me. When I turned around to ask, "What are we going to do tomorrow?" I jumped in fright as fear gripped me. Alper was no longer behind me. Standing there was the man I had seen in my dream yesterday. I couldn't comprehend it. Fear was coursing through my veins. This time I had seen his face very clearly. Again, leaning towards me, he grabbed my arms, shaking me wildly, saying, "Don't bother looking for Alper, he's with someone else now." When I woke up, I realized Alper was nudging me to wake up. My heart was still racing. Alper said, "Are you okay, honey?" "I'm fine." I brushed it off. I turned to Alper again and asked, "Is there something you want to tell me or something you're hiding from me?" Alper got annoyed. "What are you talking about this early in the morning?" he said, and stormed out of the room. This issue had now firmly rooted itself in my mind, so breakfast turned into an argument. And Alper said I was really getting on his nerves. As usual, we left the house upset for our respective jobs. At work, I confided in Burku a bit. I told her everything and cleared my mind. Burku was very supportive about this. She advocated that a woman should stand on her own feet and should never be oppressed by a man under any circumstances. After listening to me carefully, she said, "This weekend, Selin from our office is getting married. Let's go there and have a good time. And for once, let him wait for you at home." Selin's wedding was out of town. I hadn't thought about it at all, but after the recent events, it seemed like a good idea. "Okay, let's arrange a hotel before we go," I said. Burku said she would take care of it, so we agreed. When I got home, I told Alper that I would be going to the wedding on the weekend. Without questioning for a moment, he simply approved, saying, "It'll be a change for you." After dinner, Burku called me and said she had arranged the hotel for us. That day, almost for the first time, Alper and I had a peaceful dinner and watched TV. We went to bed later. Sleep was starting to overcome me, and I was closing my eyes when the knocking on the front door made both of us sit up in bed. Nobody came to our house at this hour. We didn't even know our neighbors. Since our street was mostly detached houses, the houses were quite far apart from each other. Alper went to the door and called out, "Who's there?" There was no response. He opened the door and looked outside. "There's no one here," he said. I was very scared, and it seemed Alper was scared too. He closed the door and tried to reassure me by saying, "It must be kids playing pranks," but I was not comforted. We went back to the room and eventually fell asleep again. The next morning, Burku came to our place for breakfast. After having breakfast together, we said goodbye to Alper and left the house. We were driving in Burku's car. We arrived at the hotel where we would stay. The wedding was going to take place in a village, and the hotel we were staying at was in a district connected to that village. We made our preparations for the wedding and asked for the exact location before hitting the road. As we set off, it was already dark. While following the directions, the navigation led us onto a dirt road. It was rocky and narrow, completely unexpected. We were somewhat nervous. Except for the car headlights, there was no other light visible. After a while, Burku's phone ran out of charge and turned off. I took my phone out of my bag to ask Selin for directions, but there was no signal. Our calls were unsuccessful, so we continued on the narrow road. After some time, we noticed lights reflecting from ahead. It gave us a bit of relief. The lights were coming from a village. When we entered the village and saw the crowd, we were completely sure that the wedding was taking place there. Burku parked the car, and we got out. We headed towards the village square. We asked an elderly person we encountered about the name of the village, and it turned out to be correct. "Welcome. I guess you are Selin's friends." She mentioned that her friends would come, the person said. Then we proceeded towards the wedding venue and greeted people. They provided us with chairs to sit. Drums were playing and people were dancing. However, the bride and groom were not yet visible. After a while, a little boy came to us and said, "My sister is calling you to the house." Thinking that Selin was getting ready, we followed the boy to the house he indicated. When we entered the house, a woman took us to a room and said, "Wait here, Selin will come." Then closed the door and left. The inside of the house was like a ruin. 5 minutes later, the door opened again. A man with his head down and 4 women dressed in black entered. The man stood right in front of us and lifted his head. I couldn't believe my eyes. He was the person I saw in my dream. I was stunned with fear, unsure of what to do. The man smiled just like in my dream and welcomed me to his wedding. Burku and I exchanged bewildered looks, trying to understand what was happening. While 2 of the women tried to tie Burku's hands and feet, I noticed something eerie about their feet. They were twisted unnaturally. At that moment, I understood the situation we were in. Burku and I couldn't even move. Even though we screamed, our voices wouldn't come out. The man's eyes turned pitch black, and his hands elongated almost to the ground. He grabbed me and brought me to the center of the wedding. I was on the verge of fainting from fear, but I couldn't do anything. The man sat me down next to him in the center. As I looked around, the dancers were moving strangely, and the seated guests were eating food made from animal heads and internal organs. My God, what kind of nightmare was this? A group of demons in black were circling around me, screaming with their grotesque voices and holding candles. The man forcibly held my hands and pulled me towards him, saying, "You haven't seen what your husband has done yet, but I will show you now." 2 people brought Burku in front of us. The man stood up, untied Burku's hands and feet, then held her head between his hands and shouted, "Tell the truth." I was on the brink of insanity. The surrounding demons were laughing and jumping with joy. What would Burku say? Then Burku shouted, "Alper cheated on you with me." She was in pain and tears. The demons didn't let go of her hands. They pressed harder. Then Burku shouted again, "He was at my place the day he said he was going out of town." The demon looked at me with a terrifying smile and sat back next to me. They took Burku away again. The demons around me forcefully opened my hands and poured a scalding liquid. My heart was about to stop. Then they blindfolded me and took me somewhere. The experiences were so overwhelming that I must have fainted. When I woke up, I looked around with eyes filled with fear. I was in the car. Burku was beside me, also looking at me. Both of us were in shock from what had happened. Burku's face was pale on both sides. I had henna on both of my hands. Without mentioning anything about what happened, I could only tell Burku, "Let's go home." Burku started the car without saying anything and drove off. We arrived home, still in shock. That same night, the demon also haunted Alper. When I brought up the topic to Alper, he confessed everything out of fear. I divorced Alper, but now I am married to a demon.